Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Scott's Selections here for Saturday, December 26th. Before getting today's plays of the day for the NBA, quick recap of what happened yesterday. We ended up going 3-0, had a pretty nice Christmas as we ended up winning on the Bucks -10 and -110 on FanDuel. They won that game by about 40. We had the Nets -3 and -110 on FanDuel as well. They ended up winning that game by 20 plus, and we also had Michigan in college basketball -7.5 and -120 on Bet Online, and they beat Nebraska by double digits. So a nice 3-0 day in basketball. We'll be looking for some other winners here in the NBA card. Now, for college basketball, really not that many games, especially for a Saturday. Didn't like anything in particular. I know we already did the joint show with Scott Steen on the NFL games today and with the college football games. So for that reason, we're going to do what we did yesterday in the NBA for Christmas. So we're going to go through the entire card and talk about which plays I like officially, and I'll also give out my leans on some of the other games that I do not officially have a play on. So with that being said, without further ado, we're going to dive right in and start out with the early game, which is going to be at 5 p.m. between Atlanta and Memphis. And for this matchup, I actually do have an official play, and I like the over in this matchup at 237.5 and -110 on Bet Online. Now, a couple reasons why I like the over in this spot. I know that 237.5 sounds like a really, really large total, and well, it is. But I do think that with these two teams, it's definitely warranted. Memphis in the first game played San Antonio. Now, San Antonio has definitely embraced a little bit more of I'd say a more up-tempo style of offense over the last year or two with all the young players on the roster. However, Memphis's first game ended up totaling 250 points. So they gave up 131 points, scored 119. So defensively, they have some serious issues. And offensively, anytime Morant can go for 44 in the opener, this team should have some, I'd say, very, very impressive offensive firepower that people aren't really talking about. Meanwhile, Atlanta only finished with 124 in the first game, and they ended up beating Chicago 124-104. However, the starters only played about 2.5 quarters because they were up 40 in the third quarter, and Atlanta ended up scoring 83 points in the first half. So Atlanta could have easily have scored at least 130, 140 if they kept the starters in. But of course, since they blew it open, they didn't need to. So based on that, both teams have very, very talented point guards. We already know with Trae Young and John Morant, but both of these teams love to play very, very fast-paced offense, and I do think that you will see a lot of points in this game. Now, the thing you have to ask yourself about a 237.5 total is, can both teams reach 120, for example? And in that case, you could simply just, A, have some overtime draws, B, have both teams experience a lot of success enough for the over. I think they can. I think this game should be a nail-biter. I think both teams should end up getting to 120. I think you should see this game get over the posted total. There's a reason why it was at 237 last night, and now it's already gone up to 238. Nobody's betting the under, and if you see money coming on the over at a total this high, I definitely think that it is worth considering, and I personally like the play. So for that reason, the first play on the NBA card is going to be on the Hawks and Grizzlies over the posted total of 237.5 and -110 on Bet Online. Now, the second play, I'm doing something a little bit differently. I'm actually going to be talking about my plays that I like in order, and then I'll cover all the games I have leans on after, just to make that easier so you don't have to actually sit through the entire video to get all my plays. So the second play I'm going to be talking about is going to be in a matchup between the Pacers and the Bulls, and that matchup should be taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, these two teams had pretty different experiences in the season opener, as Indiana was able to beat the Knicks by double digits, and Chicago ended up getting run out of the building by Atlanta in the matchup I just talked about, as Chicago gave up 83 points in the first half. Then Atlanta took their foot off the gas, and Chicago still lost by 20. But simply put, Chicago, this team might have a couple of talented young pieces, but for the most part, this team looks a little bit lost right now. And I know they might put in a little bit of a better effort after getting embarrassed in the season opener, but Indiana's just a better team. I know TJ Warren kind of struggled a little bit in the opener because he ended up missing the exhibition games and he looked a little bit out of sync. But Domantas Sabonis was great, as he had 32 and 13 against the Knicks. And I simply just think that him, combined with some of the other talented players like Brogdon and company, are just a little bit too much for Chicago to handle. Chicago does have some talented young players, I said before, with the likes of Kobe White, for example, or Markkanen, or even Wendell Carter. But the issue that you have is that this team just doesn't have, I'd say, anybody who's really reliable. Zach LaVine is somebody who can put up a lot of points, but he's also been somewhat inefficient throughout his entire career. Kobe White was awful in the opener with his shot, so I'm kind of curious if he will continue struggling moving forward. Markkanen was pretty good. Carter was okay. But you also have Preston Williams, the rookie, who didn't really do much. I think that this team will have a lot of growing pains with all these young guys very, very briefly knowing each other and trying to fit into a starting lineup, especially with Preston Williams. And I think that the exhibition games didn't provide enough practice time for all these young guys to actually mesh together. Now, you could argue that some of these players played last year. That is true. But Carter was injured for a decent amount last year. Markkanen was injured for a decent amount last year. And I don't exactly think that they are currently gelling. I don't want to back this team at all, Chicago. So I'm going to fade them and see what happens moving forward. But Indiana has a lot of veteran experience with Brogdon, Oladipo, Sabonis, Turner. They've been around, even Warren. They've been together for a while. And I do think that -5, which you can currently find best line available at -112 on DraftKings, is definitely a solid deal because I do think that the Pacers should end up opening up a decent lead in the third quarter and probably end up hanging on for around an 8 or a 9-point win in this game. So the second play I like in the NBA is going to be on the Pacers -5 at -112 on DraftKings, mostly a fade of Chicago after that abysmal performance in the opener. Now, the third game that I'm going to be talking about is going to be on one of the night games between the Phoenix Suns and the Sacramento Kings. You can currently shop around and find the Suns available at -3.5. However, if you shop at BetMGM, you can currently find the Suns available at -2.5 and -115 on BetMGM. And simply put, if you're giving me a free point there at 5 cents a juice when all the other books have -3.5 and there's even a couple of -4s, I'm going to take that -2.5 all day to the bank. Now, the Kings did have a very impressive overtime win against the Nuggets in the season opener. However, they also blew a decent lead in the fourth quarter there, so I wasn't exactly a fan of how they closed out the game. And I really also don't think the Nuggets are that good. I know that the Nuggets had a pretty difficult matchup against the Clippers yesterday on Christmas, but I really think there's something wrong with that Nuggets team. I don't know if it's the absence of Jeremy Grant. Does he end up going elsewhere? But this team just can't guard anybody. So Sacramento's win against Denver might look impressive, but I think it might not be as impressive as people want to make it out to be. Meanwhile, Phoenix did win a very close game against Dallas a couple of days ago, and that game was very entertaining, but at the end of the day, I just think that Phoenix has a little bit more talented of a roster. You want to go through the starting fives, you have Chris Paul and Devin Booker against the likes of De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield, and I think that Phoenix definitely has an advantage there in the backcourt. Fox, of course, is very good, and Hield is a very solid shooter, but I think Booker and Paul are just better at this stages in their careers. Now, looking at everyone else, you have Mikal Bridges versus Barnes. I'll give a slight nod to Barnes, but both of those guys are not exactly main threats offensively. I think they're more complementary pieces. Then you have Marvin Bagley versus Jay Crowder. That's the expected matchup here, which means Phoenix is going to go small. And then you also have Ayton against Holmes. Holmes gets into foul trouble almost every game he plays. So simply put, I simply think that Phoenix should be able to do enough offensively in order to win this game. Plus, if you saw them defensively against Dallas in the opener, I thought they were fantastic. This team with Monty Williams seems to have embraced a little bit more responsibility defensively, and I think that is definitely an issue that Sacramento has yet to, I'd say, correct under Luke Walton. This team defensively is just not that great, and I do think that Phoenix will generate enough open looks in order to cover this 2.5. So the third play that I like in the NBA is going to be on the Suns -2.5 and -115 on BetMGM. And the fourth play is going to be another late game here. It's going to be between the Houston Rockets and the Portland Trailblazers. And I like the Trailblazers -7.5 and -110 on DraftKings. Now, this is not solely just based on the actual matchup between these two teams. It's mostly a fate of Houston because, A, they haven't played a game yet this season, so you don't really know what to expect under new coach Stephen Silas. And B, Houston's also missing a bunch of players because of COVID-related issues. Now, James Harden is going to play, but if you want to talk about all the absences, Boogie Cousins is out, Eric Gordon's out, you also have McLemore out, and you also have John Wall out, which means that you're going to have Harden, Brown, House, Tucker, and Wood, and that is your entire starting five, and Houston will be missing at least 4 guys off the bench. I think that's a serious problem for Houston, who should deal with a lot of fatigue in the second half. I just think it's a bad matchup for Houston, especially with Harden, who don't get me wrong, of course he knows how to score points in bunches, but he's already expressed that he wants to be traded for about, a month or so. You saw him at the club, and he was ditching some team practices and stuff like that in the past couple of weeks. Would it shock you if Harden just throws out an absolute stinker of a performance, goes for, 20 points, looks disinterested on both sides of the ball? Really wouldn't surprise me. I'm not going to say that it's going to be as bad as Vince Carter in Toronto when he was trying to get traded, but I can't just assume Harden's going to come out here and drop 35. Now, is it possible? Sure. But Harden could just look disinterested, and Houston, it wouldn't surprise me with all the people who are missing this game. I just think they're going to look a little bit out of sync, and I think they're going to look pretty fatigued. Meanwhile, Portland got embarrassed in the season opener against Utah at home, and I think Portland should be pretty motivated to put in a good performance here, especially after they have some expectations, made some moves during the offseason. A lot of people love their offseason, getting Covington, Derek Jones, people like that. They had a complete no-show in the opener, and I just think that Portland should do a pretty good job of bouncing back and looking very, very sharp at home against this very, very shorthanded Houston Rockets team. So the other play that I like, the final play that I like in the NBA card here for Saturday, December 26th, is going to be on the Trailblazers -7.5 and -110 on DraftKings. So I'll recap those 4 plays once again at the end of the video. But looking at the rest of the card, now I'll give out my leans. At 7 o'clock, you have the Cavaliers versus the Pistons. Pistons went from roughly -2 to -1.5. Total has dropped from 220 to 213, 213.5. I don't really know why Detroit's favored in this game. I'm not going to play it because I do think the line is a little bit questionable, but I do like the Cavaliers in this spot from just a lean. Cleveland won the opener against Charlotte. Definitely looked sharp. Garland and Sexton looked very, very good as a combo, I'd say tandem in the backcourt. But Detroit looked good for about 3 quarters against Minnesota before they completely unraveled in the 4th quarter. And not only did they not win the game, they also didn't cover, despite covering for the first 3.5 quarters or so. But Detroit's just not good. I think they're one of the worst teams in the league. You want to look at their lineup, I don't think you can really argue with that. I mean, you're going with Killian Hayes, rookie point guard. You got DeLon Wright. You got Jeremy Grant, Blake Griffin, and Mason Plumlee. That is just not a good starting lineup. Now, comparing that to Cleveland, you have Garland, Sexton, Okoro. Okoro actually looked pretty good in his first game in the NBA. Now, Kevin Love is questionable. Might play, might not. But if he does not, Larry Nance Jr. definitely did a great job filling in. And you also have Andre Drummond. The main issue I have with Detroit here is the fact that Drummond should end up having 20 rebounds or so, because I don't think Mason Plumlee has a chance to battle Drummond on the boards. I think Cleveland's generated a ton of second chance points and probably win this game by around 5. So I'll lean Cleveland there. Then you have Washington and Orlando. Really don't have many thoughts on this one. I know Washington hung tough with Philly in the opener. Orlando ended up pulling off an upset and beating Miami. Really no thoughts here. I'd probably lean to the over. I was at 229.5 up to 231 most spots, but it's also available at 230.5 on Bet Online. I'll lean to the over. Seems like a decent amount of money is coming in on it, so I'll lean there before this line ends up climbing to around 232, 233. But once again, these are all leans, so no real official thought. Then you have Charlotte -2.5 against Oklahoma City. I'll lean to Charlotte. Yes, they ended up losing in the opener, but Rozier had 40-plus points. He looked great in the opener. Even Gordon Hayward looked really good as he had 20-plus points. They look sharp. I know that if you look at the injuries, Cody Zeller is going to be out, and Biyombo is going to be the new starting center, which is a bit concerning because I don't think Biyombo is very good. But then again, I don't think Cody Zeller is very good either. But Oklahoma City, I talked about Detroit now. They might be one of the worst teams in the league. Oklahoma City should be in the same boat. They have roughly 17 draft picks over the next 5 years in the first round. So this team is definitely tanking. And you have Gilgeous-Alexander, George Hill, Dort, Baisley, and Horford. That is definitely a tanking lineup. Now, Gilgeous-Alexander is very, very good, but the rest of the roster is not very good. This team should probably win less than 20 games all year long. And I think that Charlotte, despite losing the opener, has a more talented roster with Graham, Rozier, Hayward, P.J. Washington, Biyombo. That's just a much better starting lineup. And you also have LaMelo Ball, who I know ended up going 0 for 5 in the opener. He didn't look great at all, but he does have the ability to provide a spark off the bench, and I just don't think that Oklahoma City has that. So I'll lean to Charlotte -2.5. I think they'll win that game probably by about 5. Now, looking at the other matchups here, you got Philly against New York. Currently, it's at Philly -8.5, and it is at the over-under of 215, 215.5, give or take. You have seen some money coming in on the under and some money on Philly. Now, Philly struggled a little bit in the opener with Washington, but I think Washington could just be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference with the likes of Westbrook and Bradley Beal. So they have a pretty solid tandem there. I think the roster is not that bad. Bertans as well, solid three-point shooter. You know, you have the Knicks, who looked pretty sharp for about 2 quarters against Indiana. Barrett was great in the first half. Even Julius Randle was very solid. But the issue you had was that they got into foul trouble, especially Randle, and the whole thing unraveled against Indiana. And New York, once again, another awful, awful team in the NBA. Do I really want to lay 8.5 with Philly? Not really, but I'm not going to be taking the points with New York because I don't think that team's very good. I'll lean to the. I think it's a tough one, honestly. I'll lean to the under. Not exactly thrilled by it, so I'm not going to play it personally. but I will lean to the under in this one because I do think that the Knicks, with Thibodeau, seem to be playing a little bit of a slower style of offense, and I think that they will force Philly to beat them in the half court, and I do think you will see this game end up landing in probably the around 208, 209 or so, so I'll lean to the under in that one. Now you have the Indiana-Chicago game. I already gave out a thought on that, so I'll skip that. You have Toronto-San Antonio. Toronto's currently -2 as they end up taking on San Antonio, who had a pretty impressive win against Memphis in the opener, won by double digits. Total's gone up from 225 to 227.5. I'm going to lean to Toronto here. They looked pretty underwhelming against the Pelicans in the opener, but I do think they'll bounce back here against the San Antonio team that might have had a good game in the opener, but I really just don't think San Antonio is that good. I think this team is probably going to miss the playoffs or at least fight for an 8 seed. I don't think the Spurs really have much talent on the roster. They have a couple of good young pieces, and you also have DeMar DeRozan and Aldridge, who are sprinkled in there for some veteran punch. But I think Toronto's just the better overall team. So for that reason, I'll lean to the Raptors in that one. Other than that, though, you have Memphis and Utah in the 9 o'clock game, the final game we're going to be talking about in the video. And for this one, you have Utah is currently a 9-point favorite and Minnesota, and Utah's total has gone up from 225 to 229. A lot of money coming in on the over, mostly because of the fact that Utah definitely played up-tempo in the opener, and Minnesota's, I'd say, defense looked a little bit underwhelming against Detroit for the first 3.5 quarters, and Minnesota has been known to partake in some fast-paced games in the past year or so. Now I'm going to lean to Utah on this one, though. Utah looked great in the opener, smacked Portland on the road. Meanwhile, Minnesota might have beaten Detroit. They struggled for about 3.5 quarters before going on a bit of a 3-point barrage in the fourth. I think Utah's just a much better team. I think that even though Anthony Towns is a great center, I think Gobert should do a decent job of at least limiting him to some degree. And if you want to compare that, I don't think Minnesota's anybody for Donovan Mitchell. I think that Minnesota should struggle defensively, and I think offensively they definitely did not look as sharp as they wanted to in the opener. I think Utah should probably win this game by double digits. If Minnesota struggled to beat Detroit, I think this Minnesota team is not very good. I think Utah is a playoff team in the Western Conference, so I think Utah should end up coming out, punching them in the mouth, and winning this game by double digits. So once again, though, the 4 plays that I do like on the card that I'll officially go with are going to be the Hawks and Grizzlies over 237.5 and -110 on Bet Online. The Pacers -5 against the Bulls at -112 on DraftKings. The Suns at -2.5 at -115 on BetMGM. And the Trailblazers at -7.5 at -110 on DraftKings. A time recording of 12:22 p.m. Eastern Time. Other than that, though, that's been Stomach Scott Selections. Good luck to all of you and your respective bets today. Bye, everyone.